Hey everyone, Tim Sciascia from Berkeley Yeast here again with my final video in a series exploring aspects of non-alcoholic beer production. Non-alc beer sales have been reported to have grown almost 30% in 2024. That's a figure that breweries can't ignore, even if the segment is a small portion of overall beer sales. In one study where consumers of non-alcoholic beer were surveyed, flavor and variety of choice made up for 69% of what the subjects missed about consuming normal strength alcoholic beverages. That study was based on 418 subjects. Coincidentally, 418 is also the number of non-alcoholic beers that Hall of Fame baseball player Wade Boggs once drank on a cross-country flight. What does this all mean to you? Well, it's obviously time for you to brew a great tasting non-alc beer. This is such a fun space to experiment in. It's different from making normal strength beers, so I don't know about you. I'm really excited to be playing around with new ingredients and techniques and just thinking about beer in a very different way. Not to mention, all the other things you find amazing about brewing potentially have a home here as well, like milkshake IPAs. I can't wait to make an NA milkshake IPA. Truly, if you have the ability to pasteurize and want to brew a non-alc milkshake IPA with me, hit me up. I'm so serious right now. Now, a key part of this entire video and the recipe design process I'm going to walk you through is the strict use of maltose and Maltotriose negative yeast for fermentation. This process can produce great tasting beer without the need of expensive alcohol removal equipment. Because these beers go through the tiniest fermentation, they tend to smell more like wort than beer. And that's why the most influential ingredient in brewing a high-quality non-alc beer is the yeast. I am going to put on my sales hat here because I honestly believe the following. Berkeley Yeast 2 NA strains, Cabana and Classic, are the best on the market. These two versions have been engineered to have further capabilities to remove wort aroma than our competitors' products. Like I mentioned before, because you have so little fermentation happening in a beer that will be no higher than 0.5% ABV, then you have a lot of untransformed molecules, and thus you have that worty aroma. That's not the case for our strains. We have bioengineered NA Classic and NA Cabana to overproduce beer metabolites like esters so that your NA beer smells and tastes like normal strength beer. NA Classic, it also produces a small amount of hop-adjacent compounds during fermentation, and NA Cabana produces tropical fruit and New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc-like aromas. These added features further eliminate wort aroma. An added benefit that I think is an important fact about our NA yeasts is that they are 100% Saccharomyces. They're not hybrids, they're not Pichia, they are brewer's yeasts from top to bottom, so the learning curve of their fermentation is minimal. There are no odd procedural requirements when it comes to fermentation. You oxygenate as normal at knockout, ferment at 68, just like most ale yeasts you've used. But before we talk about the brewing process, let's point out the four main differences between NA beer versus normal strength beer. The main differences are lack of ethanol as a sensory component, lack of ethanol as a solvent, lack of the other fermentation characteristics that accompany alcohol production, and lack of ethanol as a stabilizer against pathogenic bacteria. If you want to learn more about the food safety concerns of brewing NA beer due to the lack of ethanol, which you definitely should, check out my videos on YouTube or read Berkeley Yeast's best practices document on our website. All of these can also be found on Craft Beer and Brewing's website, both of which will be linked in the video description below. Ethanol provides so many features for beer that we as brewers have learned to work alongside of. Sweetness and body effects, its aroma for better or for worse, and its ability as a solvent for flavor extraction from hops and other ingredients. These need to be considered and reevaluated through the lens of an ethanol-less product. Due to the absence of ethanol, some ingredients and flavors that brewers commonly infuse will be poorly extracted, or the opposite, overwhelm the NA beer at the addition levels that we are used to. But we'll return to that last subject shortly. Building the framework for your non-alc recipe should start with choosing a maltose and Maltotriose negative yeast, and then creating the proper mash conditions and parameters to ensure a 0.5% ABV or lower beer. It is very important to get as much fermentation as possible up to 0.5% ABV, so a wort that has a small amount of glucose but not too much is key. As a result, our main objective in the mash is to limit glucose production. This is achieved through two methods. First, your mash will be much smaller than you're used to. Typically, your starting gravity will be in the 5 to 6 Plato range, give or take. Secondly, I would suggest a very short mash rest at 160 degrees Fahrenheit for only several minutes. We aren't really worried about efficient enzymatic action here because our yeast can't ferment the maltose released by this high temp alpha amylase rest. but that doesn't mean off-target organisms will not ferment maltose, so keeping sugar production low in general could be beneficial to stability. Which malts would I recommend? Honestly, as you and your brewery begin to explore the NA space, I think it is important to keep things simple. For this reason, a base recipe for any lighter style, like a Pilsner up to an IPA, should have a grist of mostly North American two-row. This is a consistently malted grain that will give us reproducible results. Adding in some foam positive grains like malted wheat or some characterful grains like Vienna or not Munich is completely acceptable. But keep specialty malts to a minimum at first. I do think getting some dextrin or chit malt in there helps with body and texture, so I recommend some portion of either of those. As you mash in, target a much higher liquor to grist ratio than usual, somewhere in the 4-to-1 range, and add a good amount of acid to buffer the rise of pH we're going to see once the sparge begins. I've always used phosphoric, but lactic works here as well. A mash pH of 4.8 with the high liquor to grist is a good starting point. Once your mash is steeped for just 5 minutes, it's time to begin Vorlauf and then lauter. Sorry, you're going to have to wait a little longer to take your bathroom break. One thing I'll mention now is to not get too far ahead of yourself. We are all familiar with the concept of being able to add but not take away. This greatly applies here. We can always add more bitterness, add more hop flavor, color, haze. So start with a simple recipe and build from there. And don't forget, if you're going to pasteurize your beer, great. That means that once the beer is cold and further fermentation is inhibited, then you can add sweeteners and body enhancers without fear of further feeding any bacteria or yeast present. Now that lautering is complete, your kettle is full, and your wort is about to boil, let's take a moment to talk about hot side hopping. Depending on the style of beer you're trying to emulate, hot side hops are going to help develop authentic beer flavors. But with the lack of ethanol, bitterness, and astringency can overpower your beer very quickly. I would use caution and be judicious when bittering all substyles of NA beer. Keep IBUs on the lower side to start. Remember, you can always add more bitterness via tetra later on. Whirlpool hops can definitely give your beer a layered hoppiness, but too many could lead to a cooked vegetative quality, kind of like that black tea flavor that one might find in hop waters. I would consider using cryo to limit vegetative astringency. And don't forget, if you're fermenting with either of Berkeley Yeast's NA strains, you'll also get some hop-like aromatics just by using those. Pretty cool. Okay, our Whirlpool hops are added. Now's the time to further adjust your pH in your kettle. Bring it down so that your final wort pH will be 4.8 if it isn't there already. If it's lower than 4.8, don't worry. Low pH helps slow the growth of many microbes, which is 100% a good thing in non-alc brewing. Okay, it's time to chill your wort for fermentation. If you've been unimpressed with non-alc yeast, then it's time to give our strains a try. Feel free to email me to talk about getting you a pitch, or to talk about the many worlds theory. Either one, I'm very happy to discuss. Like I mentioned before, chill the wort to 68 or so, aerate as normal, about 10 parts per million, and then watch fermentation with our yeast rip away. Our pitch rate is 1.5 million cells per milliliter per degree Plato. So we're going to be finished with fermentation sometimes in as little as 12 hours. The real degree of fermentation is going to only be about 10 to 20%. After fermentation is complete, you'll want to take measures to slow any growth of bacteria that may have snuck into the beer. Adjust your pH so that it is below 4.2 and get the beer cold immediately. While the beer is cold, we can execute benchtop trials of all sorts of flavorings and additives to further framework our beer. Pull some beer from the tank, evenly split it up into containers or flasks, and iterate numerous blends tweaking any number of variables. Let's take one small step back. Now, if you're making an IPA, I don't know about you, but I dislike the grassy flavors from a cold dry hop. So let's make an exception for hops as the only non-sanitary ingredient we will add before crashing. Add them at the end of fermentation at the same time as or soon after you crash the tank. This way you'll extract some aroma and flavor, but inhibit bacterial growth. By the way, don't crash the tank lower than 36 degrees Fahrenheit or you might freeze the beer. Once your beer is cold and you've worked through your benchtop trials, bring in your additives to your full batch. You can add preservatives like potassium sorbate or a Kyber and MycoClear combo. Start to adjust all the other metrics of the recipe like sweetness via a company like Pure Malt. But one thing you won't want to manipulate at this time is haze, because once your beer is tasting right, with all of these additives added, then now it's time to fine, filter, and or centrifuge your beer. I highly suggest using some form of mechanical clarification. You'll want to get as much protein, hops, and yeast out of there as you can. The more of those remaining in your beer during pasteurization, the more autolyzed and stale flavors will arise.
But Tim, my customers, they like the hazies. I can't filter my beer.
Don't worry, Cousin Sal. There are products on the market you can dose in after filtration that will add haze back into your beer, like Haze Hop Aid or Kerry BioHaze. So make a clear beer hazy again. After that, carbonate your beer as high as you possibly can, package it, and then send it to the pasteurizer. Not pasteurizing your beer? Then keep it cold at all times until consumed. If you want to see some specific numbers for a grist, hops, or natural flavorings and extract usage, click the link in the video description that will bring you to 2 non-alc recipes on our website that I originally wrote for craft beer and brewing. I have a Pilsner and a West Coast IPA recipe that can help you get started. And keep checking back as I will be adding more and more recipes and content, not just about non-alc, but all of our yeasts and the styles you can brew with them. And of course, reach out to us at Berkeley Yeast. We are more than happy to help guide you through the start of your non-alc journey. People are drinking less alcohol, but the quality of craft non-alc beer is getting better. Don't lose customers to other non-alc categories. I've tasted some really good craft non-alc beers lately, and I know for a fact that anyone can brew something special. You just need the right ingredients, the right yeast, and of course, you need to have safe practices. Speaking of creating something special, if you've liked my video, maybe press the like button and consider subscribing so you can catch all my content. All right, y'all. Thanks for watching along. For Berkeley Yeast, I'm Tim Sciascia. Best of luck with your non-alc brewing.